So, welcome to the very first entry of this series, which, by the way, I don't know how many they will be, but as you could read in the description of this entry, the rationale is pretty simple. Katia and I try in the episodes of the podcast to use the less technical technical language or jargon, singing music jargon, to make it in a way understandable for everyone. But we understand that no matter how hard we try, there are many terms that for people who are outside the world of music or singing may not be able to understand. So, with that in mind, I thought that it was worth to prepare a good number or at least the necessary number of blog entries that can cover that number of terms that we would like you to understand. So that's why there is not a specific number of entries, but they all will be basic. That's why it is called essential in the hope that it will be of help when you're listening to our episodes. Moreover, the ones that we have with video where we are talking about given score music sheet on the screen and we say yes, in this area you have to do this and then there is a legato, and well, even if you have it on the screen and you don't know what that symbol on the screen means, you would hardly ever understand what is a legato. So that's the overall purpose of these entries. Truth is that I will try to be very go to the point, but there is no specific or prefix duration of any for any of these entries. So it will, if it takes 5 minutes, it will take 5 minutes. If it takes half an hour, it will take half an hour. Also, I will try to have them all in live sessions in case that somebody may eventually join. I also know that most of our listeners or our public on YouTube comes from Asia, so there is a good number of hours, difference of hours, that makes it very hard. Because when you are sleeping, I am awake, and the other way around. So hopefully, at some point, some of the listeners will meet me here live. That will happen eventually. We don't know when, but that will happen when it happens. So let's get started. Enough with the talk. So, I am going to share with you on the screen, and let me put it on the screen. I am going to share with you on the screen this document that I am preparing. It is a work in progress, and you will notice why it is a work in progress, because I want you to walk side by side with me in the understanding on how I am preparing it. I think that it will end up being a good reference work. Um, First, I would like to address, you know that very often we talk about the notes, if it is a do, if it is a re, it is a la, it is a si bemol, it is a sol, etc., etc. For the sake of simplicity, I have left only the letters that refer to each of the notes, which means that later you will need to look for a reference on what each of these means. Only to make it simple for today, because I'm going to be erasing it later, I am going to put to the right, and I need to move yep, I'm moving it to the right on your screen so you can see. It is what is called the B is called the C, the A is called the La, the G is called the Sol, the F is called the Fa, the E is called the Mi, the D is called the Re, and the C is called the Do. That's how it actually works. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. That is the series, that is the order of the notes. And if you notice, it appears that I prepared it in a reverse order, because even though we say do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, instead of making it descending, I made it ascending for a reason. Once we finish reviewing this complete Excel that I am putting on the screen, I also did it on Excel because it will be much easier for us to work on changes. Uh, should we need during the explanations to add or delete anything. So once we have clarified, these little boys here on column B are the name of the nodes in descending order: C, si, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. You will also notice that we have something called here the octave. It is very often, and I am pretty sure you have read somewhere in the internet, oh yeah, because that's where the Queen of the Night sings the Fa 6. Well, I put it in I entered it on the wrong line. So they say, oh, the Queen of the Night has a Fa 6. Or it would be better if they only say F6, correct? Which, by the way, is not the note, it is a sharp, but I don't want to make it way too complicated. So, assuming they were talking about the Fa6 or the F6, you simply go here and notice that they are referring to this note in a specific. Don't worry, I am about to talk about the frequency. When they say, "Oh, the tenor reached the high C," they are referring to this, which could be AC5. That's what this number on the first column is making reference to. I captured it from another table of reference, so forgive me if there should be any mistake in the data that I entered here, because I did it all on myself, and sometimes copying from one screen to the other, one may commit a mistake. It appears to be solid, but forgive me, my excuses if you find there's a mistake here. So you may also say, oh, but that is here, but that is a very low note because he reached an F2. The F2 is here, and that's how it's composed. The F and the number of the octave, and pretty much likely they are talking about the note of a bass. Okay, but we are going to get there, don't worry. So that's how these first two columns work. They are the notes in ascending order, and this is the octave they refer to. They are put into groups of ascending numbers, as you may notice, from 1 to 6. The one, if you have already noticed, there is no voice covering that range, but I chose to leave it there as a reference. There are a couple of extra things that I want to share with you. One of them is that you need to be aware that all these notes are continuous. It is not only that I enter them on Excel using all the lines one after another. It's because the whole range is a continuum. There are no empty spaces. This is what the voice or our immutable sounds range looks like. Okay, that's another thing that I wanted to mention. Let's go now to column C where I add the frequency. About the frequency, I would tell you to keep it at hand because it's going to be interesting when we go deeper in further in later episodes or in later entries because we are going to go back to the frequency very often. And don't worry if you don't understand very clearly what frequency and hertz means. I am going to dedicate a complete entry on the physics and the science behind the emission of mechanical waves, which happens to be sound. But that will come later. Only for today, the understanding is that frequency, the number of cycles per second, is measured in hertz. That's the unit. So, if you want to know the F6 that the Queen of the Night, and I insist that is really not the note the Queen of the Night sings, you may find that it is a 1396, almost 97, we can round it to 97 cycles per second, which of course it's a lot. Just trying to imagine the vocal cords moving at the speed of 1000, almost 400, let's round it to 1400, 1400 times per second. Guys, this is just amazing. That can blow anybody's mind. And the high C for the tenor has a vibration of 523 cycles per second, which still is a lot for a male voice, and so on. That's pretty much how it works. That is a reference of the cycles per second. Um, I also wanted to notice something now that we are talking about the frequency, and that explains the column D, which is the difference. What I have done is that to the actual note, let's start with the B6, the C6, you are subtracting the previous note. That means the La. And so that gives you the difference. Because if you notice, the difference between each of the notes keeps growing. That means that the notes and the difference among each of the notes is not constant. The higher the note, or the higher the octave of the note, the higher the difference between the notes, which means that the difference between the sol and the fa really depends on the number of the octave. There is a mathematical reason for that. Friends, I am going to go to a number that is very much, in fact, I think I'm going to paint it differently. I am going to make it, um, why don't we make it, I'm going to paint it in black, and the letters I'm going to paint them into white so that one can notice, because I wanted to mention that the note of reference, or this system that I am putting on the screen, takes as a reference the La4 or the A4 at 440 cycles per second, or 440 hertz. That is important because, and this number, please keep this information at hand, because this number is very recent. In the past, or if I remember well, if it was around 1936, 1953, it is less than 100 years that the community of musicians finally reached an agreement and decided that the La of reference could be the 440, because there is more, or there was more than one La as taken as a point of departure, which is of absolute importance. Why? Because it means that, for instance, Il Barbiere di Siviglia could be could sound a little different depending on what was the law of reference. If it was a law of 432, our dear Barbiere would sound a little lower. There is another, if I recall well, it was 444, 442. So if it was pitched to A442, then our Barbiere would sound a little higher, which means that we really don't know, and Maestro Rossini really doesn't know, that his Barbiere can sound at least in three different ways. Higher if the La was 442, the one that we have now 440, and maybe a 432, or any other that any person would have liked to think of. So there is not one definite, or there was in the times of Maestro Rossini composed it, there was not definite uh, agreement on the pitch of the La that was going to be used. But it is not only the case for Rossini, it is the case for basically all the composers that we know. Rossini, Mozart, Saint-Saëns, Bizet, Donizetti, Verdi, Puccini, and any other, Wagner himself, any other you can think yourself, all of them were prior to this very recent agreement on the value of the La. Then I also wanted to share with you that the number of cycles, or the number of hertz, or the frequency for each of the notes is a mathematician formula that keeps adding the number of notes and working on the tones and the semitones, which now sounds like way too complicated, right? Keep in mind that you don't need to understand what is the formula or the rationale behind for giving this number of cycles per second to each of the note. But keep in mind that this value is only, or follows only, and the reason for the la also, and the reason for the number of notes, the whole reason for this system of notes is only of occidental taste. There is no science behind this. The calculations for finding the frequency of each of the notes, yes. But for the definition of the number of notes, for the definition on the octaves and the number of octaves, no. That only follows what the Occident feels like it works. It is a matter of what we feel comfortable with. When I mean that, and let's go back to the right of the screen, I am saying this. If anybody else tells you differently, it means that this person doesn't really know what he's talking about. Let's erase these examples. What I mean is that if you are familiar with the number, oh, it is in, oh, why can't I change it? Yeah. If you're familiar with the mathematical value of E, there is a number that no matter where you live or what you do, the physics of our goal of our world will always give you a number that starts like this. If you know the number P, then you know that this is the number that goes and on and on. 3.141592, and on and on and on. However, the La4 or the A4 is not this case. These two are scientifically proven and will not change no matter what we humans do. The A4 is the result of human consensus. That is of absolute importance. Keep in mind that our A4 and its 440 cycles, it's just a matter of human agreement on the number given on the Occidental taste and affinity towards what we call harmony between sounds. Of course, music theory is explored further than what I just explained, but that was one of the things that I wanted to mention. Something else that I want to mention is that, or to ask you, is to take a look at the values. I have put in bold the difference between the E and the F and the difference between the B and the C, which means the difference between the Mi and the Fa and the difference between the Si and the Do. The Si naturale and the Do. That's because the difference between them is not a complete tone. I have left of the same height. Look at this. All these cells or these notes are the same height. But truth is that the value between the Mi and the Fa, it's a semitone. Look at the previous number. The difference between the Mi and the Re is 143. But the difference between the Mi and the Fa, it's only 78. It's only a semitone. Same case for the Si and the Do. The difference between the Si and the La, it's now 107, but between the Si and the Do, it's only a semitone. It's 58 hertz. And that's going to be the case for all the octaves. The difference between the Si and the Do, it's not a tone, it's a semitone, half a note. The difference between the Mi and the Fa, it's not a complete tone or a complete note. It is a seminote or a semitone. It's half the value. That is going to be very important later. Don't worry about that. And I know that I have been giving you plenty of information, but believe me, it's going to be very important for later. And since I have been a university professor as well, I am a sort of a tyrant. So I would expect that you people, if you don't memorize everything that I am explaining, you will go back to the video and go to the reference because I am going to be saying later, go back to video one, or I explained it earlier. So because I know that has been explained before. So what have we covered so far? These are the letters that we use to describe each of the notes. They are put into groups that we have decided to call them octaves, and the number of octaves gives us a quick way of finding out the note F6, C4, G5, and finding the number or the frequency of value. For you to feel a little better, I can tell you that most musicians do not really understand what frequency is, do not really understand what a hertz is, and they don't know the number of hertz for each of the notes. I also have to tell you that the understanding of music comes most of the times from empirical knowledge and very rarely from science. That's where we are going to be clashing very soon with other people because I am going to be making reference to that very, very soon. And now the third topic that I wanted to mention today is, and I want to emphasize it I really want to be very, very, very clear in what I am going to explain now because I entered it as typical tessitura ranges. First things first, I am using the standard names of the tessituras as it is soprano, mezzo-soprano, contralto, tenor, baritone, and bass. I am pretty well aware that when we talk about opera and opera voices, we refer to the soprano and we say, it is a soprano leggero, it is a soprano lirica, it's a soprano spinto, it's a soprano drammatica, it's a high soprano or a soprano coloratura. I know I am using just a standard name of soprano because if I start doing that, this chart is going to get way too complicated. And I am using the word typical because this is something that I want to mention and that I know that many people when they watch this video later are going to hate me for what I am about to say. This is typical because there is absolutely no science. There is no science supporting that a soprano needs to reach, for instance, the E6. There is none. There is absolutely no science behind saying that a tenor needs to have a C5. There is none. What we have is empirical knowledge of tenors usually reaching a C5. That's all we have. We don't have any science supporting that this has to be the range. Of course, music or singing teachers can tell you that a well-trained voice needs to reach it because of this, but that is more an inference or empirical knowledge only based on their experiences. We do not have I won't stop remarking it as often as necessary. We do not have the scientific knowledge to support that a given morphology of a voice is able to produce a given range. Because if that could be the case, they could just, if the machine could be a scanner, they could just need to scan my whole emission system and they would say, Ricardo is fit to sing as high as a D and as low as an E2. But for this guy, the range is going to be different. We are many years away from being able to do that. So we are building our understanding only on experience, on empirical knowledge. That's why I wanted to remark that I am saying typical. This is what they usually cover because this also leads us to one of the things that many people like to start being toxic in the internet. But Maria Callas, hide the E flat. I insist I haven't talked about the flats that will come later, but let's assume it was an E. But Maria Callas had an E. She had a super range for that. Truth is that not all sopranos have a high C, their high C, and not all sopranos have much higher than that. Even though it is still believed that sopranos can reach as high as an E. Truth is, most do not. But remember that there are sopranos who can go as high as these two notes, these two babies here, the F and the G. If I remember well, Katia in fact sings as high as the G6. For instance, a mezzo-soprano, it is considered that a mezzo should reach as high as an A. But recall that Maestro Verdi, for Azucena in Il Trovatore, is requesting the mezzo to sing And I see here, here, let me point it here. Here, Maestro Verdi is requesting the mezzo to sing this note, which is out of the range. So the question is, did Maestro Verdi really wrote the role for a soprano, which is within range, or wrote it for an extraordinary mezzo soprano who doesn't really exist? Or our typical understanding of ranges of the voices is just that. I think it is only written for singers who can reach that note. But it is us who are making it too complicated. And the contraltos are, this is what is expected to be the average extension of the voice for a contralto. But keep in mind, and I have mentioned it before, that there are contraltos, and we have the case of Maestra Auralia Dominguez, who sang Amneris in with Maria Callas, year 1951, Mexico City, and she's requested to sing this little baby here. Amneris is to sing a B5. So what happens here? But Oralia Dominguez is a contralto. She wouldn't even be a mezzo soprano if we adhere to this. So take this range with caution only as a reference because there are many exemptions in the voices. There are many voices who reach higher than this range, and there are many times that voices do not go as low as shown on this graph. Okay? That would be the case for the tenor. Not all tenors have the high C. Moreover, if he's a dramatic tenor or a Helden tenor, it's more likely that they won't have it. But if it's a tenor leggero, most likely he will have a D and probably an E for a tenor leggero, because the lighter the voice, the easier it is for them to reach high notes. We are going to explain that also later. This is the typical range for a baritone. More than often, they are required to reach the A4, which is a little high for them sometimes. And this is the range for the bass. They are expected to reach their top note, an E4, and their lowest note would be around the F2. Also notice that and this is going to be very important, and with this we are about to wrap up. If you notice, if I am going to zoom out so that you can see all them in perspective. Yeah, there we are. A little more, a little less. You can see it completed on the screen. Let me see. I can see it now. There we are. Yeah, we can see the complete range of voices now. It is very, very important. If you notice, there is really not that much difference between of the tessituras. The bass, yes, it's lower than a baritone, but it seems that only around for 3 notes. The baritone is lower than a tenor, but it appears that only for around 2 notes. Same case for the contralto and the mezzo. The contralto is lower in the range of the notes, but only for around 2. And if it is a contralto like Oralia Dominguez, who can even hit this note, it even appears that her range is more than the mezzo herself. And the range between the mezzo and the soprano is also 1 or 2 notes, unless it is a high soprano, coloraturas that they are higher, but the mezzo and the lyrical soprano are very close. And I am mentioning this because the difference of the number of notes that they can hit is not those many, and it is also a very common mistake, even for people who have been in the world of opera for a number of years. And that is that the tessitura is never based on the range of the notes. You have a C natural, very beautiful, then you must be a tenor. It can still be a baritone. Oh, you have an F2, then you are not a baritone, you're a bass baritone. Because we are playing with those labels so often that at some point that game ends up playing against us. We will go back in deep to talk about that in a more comprehensive way later. But insist, the tessitura of the voice is not given by the number of notes a singer can sing. Never. It's a complete mistake. It is a misunderstanding. The tessitura is based on the color, what we call color, of the voice. My voice now may very well cover the range of a baritone, but still I am not a baritone. No matter how hard I try, I don't sound like a baritone. The voice of the baritone is like wider, and the voice of the bass sounds like even wider. We will address that when we talk about the harmonics and the subharmonics, but that will also come later. So now, to summarize, did we talk about today? We talk about the name of the notes, the system for differentiating as they are rising, called the octaves, and now you can understand why I did it apparently opposite as we are ascending. We are ascending in the number of cycles, even though it is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. You don't read it downwards, you read it upwards. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. That's the order that you're going to read it. I shared with you the number of hertz that each of the note belongs to. I explained why this is the difference, and you can see the difference in the tones and the semitones between the mi and the fa, between the si and the do. And we also talked about the tesituras and what their typical ranges are. So enough for today. Thank you very much. And I think I am planning to have this non-essential, essential for non-musicians or singers once weekly. I am expecting to have them around Saturdays. I know that this will not work for our listeners, but eventually at some point we